still really good information that he gave. And so as we move into looking at this, we're looking at the blood supply. Now, when we talk about the blood flow, we know that there is the blood flow that we think of inside that heart that's being pumped to the pulmonary and the systemic circuit. The coronary circuit, okay, it's almost like it works in opposite, because the flow through the coronary arteries, it's best when the heart is relaxed. So it's almost like, when the heart contracts, that's sending blood, throughout the pulmonary and the systemic circuit, and it's like it's stopping it to the coronary. But when the heart relaxes, it allows the blood flow back into the coronary circuit. So we get this, it almost seems like it's a little, okay, if this one's contracted, it's not good here, but good, that sort of scenario. So when we get the blood supply going in the coronary, we're going to have the blood return from the coronary circuit. Just like we have the blood return from the systemic circuit and the pulmonary circuit. If we've got the blood flow in that coronary circuit to all these tissues of the heart, that blood has to return to the heart just like all the other blood in the body. So when we look at the coronary blood flow, once again, all blood flow of the body returns to the right atrium. For the coronary circulation, we are going to have something known as the coronary sinus. What do you remember about the definition of a sinus? Like a little hole, little canal, something to that effect. So we have a coronary sinus. Three areas, three parts of that coronary circulation are going to come back to that coronary sinus. Now, when we have that return, we're getting something from the great cardiac vein, the posterior interventricular vein. What did that just tell me? To the back of the heart, and our left marginal. What is that telling me? The left side, and then that part, if you take and look at your heart, okay, you can see these areas that are being referred to. We have what's called the great cardiac vein. Travels along the anterior interventricular artery, collecting blood from different parts of the heart, and that is going to empty into this coronary sinus. Other areas for the blood flow, that middle cardiac vein, the left marginal vein. So what we end up with, we have a little part that, let me see if it's represented here. Okay, so in the model that you have, if you take, are they trying to show that as being, let me see the model. All right, so when you look in the model of your heart, there should be like a little indentation. Okay, there's like a little indentation on this right atria. And that's letting you know that that's the coronary sinus. So when we look at this right atrium, they're trying to represent the inferior vena cava, the superior vena cava, and then that little depression that's in there is being the coronary sinus. Because all the blood is going to return into that right atria. Now, one of the things that he did talk about a little bit was the structure of the cardiac muscle itself. All of this muscle. When we look at it under the scope, it does look a little bit like skeletal muscle, but major differences are present. Did you notice how he talked about how skeletal muscle with the contraction, the actin and the myosin, blah, 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 but we still have that type of setup working in the heart muscle? But what becomes important is when we are looking at the cells that are making up our myocardium, okay, they need, even though it's going to be functioning as every single individual cell, all right, this is, it's not like the skeletal muscle where if we got the action potential going, we're doing this. We are dependent in the cardiac muscle for each cell to work individually. However, make it look like it's one action. So, what we're going to find, those cardiac cells, the way that they're structured, do you guys remember the intercalated discs, okay, that were present, the little markings that were in between the cells, basically cell to cell, and there's an intercalated disc. Their structure, the way that they're going to have an overlap that's present, it's going to allow for basically the flow of these ions from cell to cell to cell. And even though the heartbeat looks like one motion, it's each individual cell doing its job, which is really kind of interesting. Their connection is termed interdigitating because it looks like they simply lap over each other. They have that type of connection. Now, with the cardiac muscle, I just saw this as I was getting ready to turn it. We know that like for skeletal muscle, if we kind of get a cut or something like that, for the most part, we're still going to have some function, right? If we get like a big cut or something like that, might end up with a big scar, and the actual muscle cells around that are not really functioning. However, you know, we can still have function of the muscle and that sort of thing. With the cardiac muscle, when the cardiac muscle is affected, for example, a heart attack, okay, when it's affected and that cell dies, which is what the heart attack is, the only thing that it can be replaced with is a non-working cell. Okay, so that part of the heart that we had the heart attack, where the blood flow got stopped to that particular tissue, it becomes fibrotic, meaning it doesn't function anymore. And that's why people who have heart attacks might have to have the bypass surgery, because that tissue is no longer functioning, and it needs to send the blood supply to the other cells that are working around it. This structure of the cardiac cells we're going to find that we have, do you guys remember in part 1 the connections that existed between cells, where you had like a gap junction, the tight junctions, and that sort of thing? We are dependent with the cardiac muscle. We're dependent on one type, the mechanical junctions, all right? Because number one, even though it's individual cells working together, we can't have those cells break apart, okay? Mechanical, something working it, okay? So, do you guys remember the desmosomes? All right, where it's like little extensions and they hold the cells together. And then fascia adherens, just adhering, okay? Something that would adhere those cells together. But then gap junctions. The gap junctions become important. In the heart, a gap junction is allowing for the movement of something. In this case, the movement of the ions. And ions give us electricity. Is that correct? So these are going to be the electrical junctions. The heart, this structure that we have, it is innervated. Now, up to this point, we have learned that there are two systems that control the body. Is that correct? The nervous system and the endocrine system. The heart requires neither. The heart is not dependent on either of these systems to make it function. The heart is autorhythmic. It is autorhythmic. What does auto mean? Self. Rhythmic, rhythm. It does not in any way depend upon the nervous system or the endocrine system for working. However, those two systems can affect it. Okay, but we don't depend on them. The structure that we get, where we've got the one cell with a huge nucleus, lots of mitochondria. Why would these cells need lots of huge mitochondria? 24/7, 365, 366 if it's a leap year. That's a lot. And mitochondria give us the energy. Is that correct? Now, we're dependent on the little gap junctions, this interdigitation that can occur, so that we can have the flow of the ions from cell to cell. All right? And if we can have the flow of the ions, we are affecting the electricity of it. Does that make sense? So, cardiac muscle, we have lots of mitochondria because it cannot function on anaerobic respiration. Which one is more efficient? Aerobic or anaerobic? Aerobic. The one with oxygen. Because if we've got oxygen present, how many ATP do we get? Roughly that 36 to 38 ATPs. But with anaerobic, no oxygen present, we get a huge lactic acid molecule and about 2 to 4 ATPs, right? Now, do you think the heart would be able to handle that huge lactic acid molecule? No. Okay? It would not be able to do anything with it. It would build up and it would kill the tissue. And kill the heart tissue, like he says, you're going to be dead. Okay? So we're dependent on aerobic respiration. Now, it can adapt to other organic fuel. When we think about aerobic respiration, what molecule do we think of being needed? Our glucose. Now, glucose. Do we always have a proper amount of that? No. Do you guys remember from part 1, like glucogenesis, gluconeogenesis, where we made the glucose from other materials? Okay? Well, because the heart needs a lot of the glucose, all right? It's adaptable to having the materials come from another source to run the ATP, to run the aerobic respiration, all right? So it can adapt, because one thing about it, like it says, oh yeah, the heart muscle is very vulnerable to a lack of oxygen. We can't have that, okay? Also, it's fatigue resistant. Isn't that a nice term? How many of us in here are fatigue resistant? I don't know about y'all, but you know, I'm kind of not fatigue resistant.